Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. It's my great pleasure to welcome today's program, Suzanne Offerman, who is Proposition Manager, Thought Leadership for ONESOURCE Global Trade Management at Thomson Reuters. And today we're going to talk about the role of emerging technologies in global trade management. Now, earlier this year on Talking Logistics, I wrote about how probably the one good outcome of the tariff wars and other developments in the global trade arena is how more companies are recognizing the value and importance of trade compliance professionals and technology. I think, the thinking, the old school thinking of, well, this is just paperwork that we could just manage with Excel spreadsheets is not only outdated, but also very risky and costly too. So as we head into 2020, what are some of the things that companies should be thinking about or expect? What are some of the lessons learned from this past year that companies can apply? And how can technologies help companies automate and streamline their trade processes? Well, those are just some of the questions we're going to address in today's episode. It's great to have Suzanne with us on the program to share her insights and perspective on this topic. So Suzanne, welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you, Adrian. It's nice to be here. So I laughed when you said about using Excel spreadsheets. When I started my career, I guess it's going on 20 years, we used to get entry documents just in paper in a file cabinet. And we'd go into audit, and sometimes you'd find everything and sometimes you didn't. So we've definitely come a long way since then. So, just moving forward, to today, 2019 has been a very interesting year where I think politics and trade have intersected. And I expect 2020 to be more of the same. We have, to name some, trade wars with China. We have disputes with the EU over aircraft subsidies. We have a dispute, for example, just this week with France, where the U.S. said it would its new digital services tax is hurting the U.S. tech companies, and so now they want to impose, I think, 100% tariffs, punitive tariffs on nearly, I think, over $2 billion of some high-end French products, champagne, cheese, and the like. Recently, too, the two countries that were exempt from some steel tariffs from the U.S. were recently mentioned, Brazil and Argentina. Suddenly, they may have tariffs. So it's rapidly changing. Day to day, you have to read your tweets, you read your email, you read everything. And I don't see it going away for 2020. So to me, the question that trade professionals should be asking is, are you in the best position to manage these changes? Can you take advantage of them? And how can you do that? So there are some ways. There are some traditional ways, such as looking at your country of origin, looking at your valuation. Can you make changes using the first sale rule and other things? But in addition to those traditional ways, there are newer ways to do that using technology. And sometimes you don't have control over the origin and the value, but you do have control over what technology that you use.
Yeah, no, a lot of great points. I mean, I think, like you said, you can't, every morning, I get the Wall Street Journal, and every morning, in the Wall Street Journal, there's probably one or two different stories, and they're usually headline stories related to global trade. And like you said, just this week already, we have, with the president being overseas, talked about, the kind of a new tiff with France now, and all it takes, like you said, is sometimes you have to check your Twitter feed as well. Not only the traditional newspapers, but just a simple tweet can change what's happening instantly. So I think keeping a pulse on what's happening is critically important. And I think the last point you brought up, there are some things you can control in terms of processes or actions you can take, and some things that you can't. But certainly one of the things that you can control is kind of taking a step back and say, hey, are we prepared for this very dynamic environment, to navigate as intelligently and as efficiently as possible, in light of all these changes? And again, you don't know what those changes are, but having the foundation to be able to respond to them quickly, appropriately, remain in compliance and so forth, I think is a critical piece. So I think those are all, key takeaways, from this past year. And going back to kind of the Excel comments, I mean, I think it's clear, hopefully it's clear to companies that, if they're managing their global trade processes with Excel spreadsheets, that, not only have they been putting themselves at risk and kind of putting, being a costly, that's just not going to cut it anymore moving forward. It's becoming more risky. I mean, in light of that, I mean, are you seeing companies, starting to invest or look to invest more in automating their trade processes, and what benefits are they going after?
Yes, so trade automation and use of global trade management solutions is definitely moving up the priority list for companies. So trade-related issues that were previously delegated to operations now are getting the attention of the C-suite executives, mainly a lot because of the news, right? You mentioned the Wall Street Journal, the Twitter. So they're very aware that this stuff is important now, and so that they have to pay attention as well. So this has helped, I think, the trade professional in some ways. So one is, I think that the decision makers view trade now as the trade professionals have to have responsibilities beyond just compliance, that they also have to do planning, because the tariff wars and protectionism are having a significant impact on costs, and there's potential to disrupt the supply chain in general. And two, I think executives are realizing that trade automation is a best practice to manage this rapidly changing trade environment. Adrian, you asked about benefits that companies are seeking. So I think overall that companies want better visibility in their supply chain so they can make real-time decisions. So they want to know, is there a duty deferral program? Can they take advantage of a free trade agreement to save money? So automation would allow you to do this planning easily. You can study the trade lane scenarios, you can discover problems and quickly remediate them. You can learn who you're doing business with, your vendors, your partners, your customers, be safe about it. You basically know all the components of your transaction, and even can generate reports to show the executives, hey, here's what we're looking at. This is why we think we need to make this change or that change, this investment or that. So I think it helps you avoid risk, correct problems in a repeatable way, saves time, saves money, streamlining your workflow. I mean, we live in a world of data and you have to know it. And so for all these reasons, I think that automation, using a GTM solution for your workflow is considered a best practice now.
Grabbing the attention of the CEO and CFO, I think that's certainly, when you listen to earnings calls or even just read the transcripts from the calls these days, that is something that's a top of mind for a lot of CEOs and CFOs, today. It's interesting because when I started my career as an industry analyst, 20 plus years ago, I still remember how, I was at a think tank and there was a VP of trade compliance at a large pharmaceutical company. And she was, let's just say, complaining that, when it came to IT investment, any kind of investment within the company, they were at the bottom of the priority list. I mean, we always talk about logistics and warehousing being at the bottom of the priority list, but I think historically, global trade management was probably even below that, because, like I said, I think for a lot of executives, they just viewed it as paperwork, and they had a file and so forth. I think fast forward to today, and I think that they're recognizing that, hey, this is really a process that's interwoven with our supply chains, and it's a process that can, quickly, make or break how successful we are as a company. And I think everything that's been happening the past couple of years with the tariff wars and everything else has just brought that to light. So I do see, I think the good news out of all this going back is that, from an investment standpoint, I think, the decision makers are actually seeing that if they are behind the curve, if they're a laggard in terms of their technologies, in terms of their internal capabilities to respond to this effectively, that this is now an area becoming a priority for investment. Now, you mentioned, visibility, and certainly visibility is one of those things that from a global, from a supply chain perspective, you hear a lot of supply chain professionals talk about, trying to achieve, end-to-end supply chain visibility. I mean, how does visibility relate to global trade management?
So, you talked about a time where the global trade professional was on, the lowest part of the chain. And there was a time where the only time they would come and try to get help or try to get any investment was when the company got in trouble. Now what we're seeing is there's more proactive approach, and that includes being able to see your supply chain and, using, technology and other methods to do that. So, for example, we, mentioned earlier that we're finding this, demand for supply chain visibility for other programs. One day there's no tariff, the next day there is. So these types of day-to-day changes, I think, are what driving interest in more global solutions rather than delegating decisions to local, subsidiaries or local operations. Because if you have a global approach and have a global solution to looking at trade, you're going to get greater visibility. Your transactions are more accessible. You have more reliable data than if you're pulling them from various regional systems and trying to manually reconcile them. It gives you a holistic approach to your supply chain, and I think in the long run, it saves money. So I think we have customers that are asking for that, and asking for, hey, I need something so that if I have I can look down at my map and see, okay, where are the problems? Where are we spending money? Where are we losing money? Where are we doing it well? What free trade agreements are out there? Like a map of the world essentially is what they're looking for, to be able to see the different pieces in play in real time.
So it sounds like, that what's happening here is similar to what's happening, more broadly in other supply chain processes, is that companies are moving away from this kind of siloed, fragmented, let's say local approach, toward kind of moving to a more holistic, integrated, approach to kind of get that big picture view. So, I think, for those companies that are, let's say, further ahead of the curve, maybe they've had some systems in place, but it was still kind of that siloed or fragmented approach. I think the movement now, if I heard you correctly, is to try to get now to kind of a more common platform where, the leaders of the industry, of the companies, can kind of get that global view of what's happening. Because, in reality, even though there might be specific things that might be unique to a local region or a local supply chain, at the end of the day, you want to be able to roll out that visibility, roll out those metrics, roll up what's happening on a global scale, and doing that by using a common platform seems to be kind of the approach that companies are taking. Is that what I heard?
I think that you're right. I think that there were companies sometimes that would have a homegrown approach to the solution, and I think they're recognizing that it doesn't work because it's too fragmented, and it makes it just too difficult to do their day-to-day operations well.
Right. So let's talk about, so we started talking a little bit about global trade solutions and kind of the, global trade management. So let's talk a little bit about, the technology now, and specifically some of these emerging technologies that we hear so much about, these days. You've got APIs, you've got artificial intelligence and machine learning. I mean, are these emerging technologies playing a role in global trade management?
Well, they are. I know, Thomson Reuters uses them. I'm sure there are other companies out there that does as well. This is what our customers are asking for. This is what they can't necessarily do themselves, right? They have the data, but they can't necessarily know how to manipulate it well. So there are several emerging technologies that can assist someone in their supply chain and managing supply chain and so forth. So you mentioned, I think, APIs, for example. So application program interface, for those who don't know what it stands for. That's a great way. It allows you to get specific information when you need it versus an extract or some kind of interface where you might just get all the information dumped to you at once. So from a practical perspective, what it means is you get real-time access to information required for business decisions versus periodic updates using an extract. So it connects, the different systems together. So for example, a concrete example could be, let's say you manufacture in China and you import to the US. You want to know, well, what's your export HS number? What's your ECN number for China? What's your import HS number for the US? An API would be a way to deliver that information for your transactions. It allows you to validate the information. Is it true? Is it false? Is there a mistake? Is it accurate? Provide rate information and so forth in an automatic way with the specific information that you need. Other examples include artificial intelligence, right? Big hot topic, it's everywhere. Right, we're trying now to teach machines to simulate human intelligence processing, let them learn, let them reason, and they self-correct. But there are some specific use cases out there where it works. So for example, in machine learning, where you might learn from prepared data, you look at patterns, the computer can look at decisions with minimal human intervention, and you can use it in, let's say, in classification. So for example, we know from customers that product classification is the first step for importing or exporting. It's often citing the most time-consuming compliance activity with high levels of inaccuracy, right? And it's something that if any customs authority in any country will audit when you're chosen. So you have to get it right. And it's also tied to your duty rate, right? And now with all these high tariffs, it becomes even more important. So a classification solution using machine learning can assist with that activity and leaving the trade professional to work on higher value compliance opportunities and planning, and let the machine try to take over some of this classification decisions. It uses, it processes a high amount of historical information that you do. It uses algorithms that can predict. Another example is you can use machine learning to predict the lead time of future shipments, even identify variables that can affect shipments. So it'll allow you factors for planning and make quick and agile change.
Yeah, no, I think those are all great examples, and those, particularly the classification piece. I mean, it's something that I've seen companies talk about in terms of leveraging machine learning. I mean, the bottom line is, for machine learning to really have its greatest impact, you need a lot of data, a lot of information, and that's exactly what is one of the key attributes of global trade management. You've got so much data and information on the transaction side, as well as when it comes to all the trade content, classification codes, compliance lists, and so forth, to really, leverage that data, that wealth of data to apply machine learning to help streamline, automate some of these processes. Something else I've heard in conjunction, particularly with, let's say, classification, is natural language processing. Is that something that you're also seeing as well?
We have seen, customers don't necessarily ask for that. They don't know that term, of course, right? But they want technologies where they can just, if they have a user who's not technical, that they can just simply type in the name of a product, for example, in the system, and that the system will know using algorithms what they mean. So for example, it'll understand questions, answers, it'll understand relationships between words. It can infer what you mean by instead of using exact words. So you want a tool, for example, that, let's say if you typed in woven ladies raincoat, let's say in a classification tool, it will know what you mean, even though those terms are not necessarily within the HS schedule itself. It can infer that if you mean woven, that you don't mean something else. It can infer if you type ladies that you don't mean children's or men's, for example, right? I mean, not to get too technical, but it matters because it matters for your classification, it matters for your duty. It can matter for a free trade agreement, whether it applies, etc. So this type of use of natural language processing and machine learning it should be baked in to some of the solutions that you're looking at.
I think at the end of the day, it's about, you hear the phrase, it's about making smarter decisions faster. And I think in this age where things are changing so much, and where there's labor constraints, or there's limited resources available, or the ability to leverage some of these emerging technologies to make those smarter decisions faster, to analyze the data and recommend what actions, preferably in a proactive manner, to take, and so forth. I think that's where the big opportunity exists here in the global trade management realm. I think those were some great examples. Well, Suzanne, we're running a little bit short on time here, so I'm just going to go to my last question here. As a way to wrap up, I mean, the only sure thing we know about 2020 is that there's going to be more change in the weeks and months ahead. So what steps or actions should, companies, take to prepare and respond effectively to whatever happens, moving forward?
Sure. So, I think we'll circle back then maybe to the central point here, which is visibility and knowing what is going on where and when within your supply chain. There has been an increased interest among trade professionals for dashboards, for embedded analytics within the GTM solution. We have customers asking for help. They want to identify inefficiencies in their supply chain. They want to look for opportunities for savings. They want to correct any errors or inconsistencies that they see in their compliance activities, to name some. And, one way to do that is with a global trade management solution that incorporates this type of visibility within the system. There's also the look of the big data. So looking at how business will be impacted by future changes. You can do predictive analytics. You can have strategic analytics. For example, we know that there's a new retaliatory tariff imposed, new FTAs out there, Brexit. How will all of these affect you? You need this information treated as insight for decision making, simulate scenarios, use statistics. And so there's just overall a greater reliance on planning tools, evaluating trade lanes. And I think that automation and global trade management solutions will just be a big help to those trade professionals who have to face this day to day. You and I are reading it in the newspaper, but they're the ones, actually making the decisions and changes based on it.
Right. No, absolutely. And like anything else, you want to make sure you have the right tools at your disposal, to make those decisions. So I think, number one, you talked about visibility, and we talked early on about, keeping a pulse of what's happening in the industry. So I think certainly that's a key thing there. And then number two, having that visibility in terms of what's happening across the global supply chain, kind of being a foundational, need there. But I think it's also taking a step back and saying, well, what are we actually doing? How are we actually responding? I think if you look around and you see a lot of Excel spreadsheets being mailed around, or a lot of manual or paper-based processes going around, or you really have a fragmented view of what's happening across, your different places where you operate, I think that's a clear sign that you don't have the foundation in place, particularly from a technology standpoint, to really respond effectively, moving forward. Well, Suzanne, I think I always say at the end of all our episodes that we always just manage to scratch the surface on these topics, but I think you provided some great insights and advice on what to expect and how to respond, and what actions to take in the global trade management realm, heading into 2020 here. So again, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today.
Oh, thank you, Adrian. It was great to be here.
I want to thank those of you that joined us. If you're watching this episode on demand, either at the Thomson Reuters website or on Talking Logistics, and you've got a question or a comment for Suzanne, you can post it there, and I'm sure she'll be more than happy to respond via that medium. Again, thank you for joining us, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.